Well, good evening, and thank you so much for being here. I am also welcoming Pastor Terry Parsons, who is our elections person, and Rick Alberg, who is our parliamentarian extraordinaire. So we will go ahead and begin, and please exercise some patience with me because this is actually going to be my first time to lead a PowerPoint and the meeting. So lots and lots of prayers. And I've got 3 screens going too. So, all right. So our theme is inspired. I believe you should all know that by now. And hopefully you've also been able to participate in your conference's pre-assembly meeting, and where this was introduced, and you hopefully learned a little bit more about what we're doing at the Synod Assembly. So tonight, our goal is to help those of you, presumably all of you, who have not been to a Synod Assembly before or not recently, and we'll talk to you about what the Synod Assembly is, and hopefully make you feel more confident, more prepared as you begin. So again, as I mentioned at the beginning, if you have your device that you plan to bring with you, we will be requiring email to do the votes. So you want to make sure you have a device, whether it's a phone, tablet, computer, that you can receive your email. And if you would please then enter your email address in the chat, and we'll test out some of our voting in just a little bit. And if you have questions also, please feel free to either put it in the chat or raise your hand or something, okay? I like it much better if we can talk, right? So, basically said what I needed to say there. So what happens at a Synod Assembly? We meet, we talk, we'll have reports, we'll have presentations, we'll have worship. We have a fine keynote presenter and preacher. She will preach at the opening worship, and the opening worship begins at 9. If you're looking for other times in the agenda, those are on our Synod Assembly website. So registration opens at 7:45, just to go ahead and put that in there. But what we also hope happens is that you get to know somebody that you didn't know before. That's an important part of the assembly, is simply seeing people from around the Metro DC area. And I think it's inspirational as we hear each other sing, as we hear different points of view, as we listen to the ministry reports, and frankly, we see some of the creativity of our sister churches. We see the inspiration that causes them to take bold steps for Jesus in our communities. And that's ultimately what we're hoping this Synod Assembly can do. With the theme inspired, the bishop is asking and hoping and praying that each of us who attends this would feel emboldened to practice, to try something, to experiment, to have fun in ministry, to reach out to our neighbors. So there's a lot that happens besides just meeting. So of course we'll have the presentation of compensation guidelines, resolutions, budgets, all of these kinds of things. Those will be presented. You'll hear, and that's some of the business, but we get to hear from the bishop, from the assistants to the bishop. I think it's cool. So we have our opening worship, and we ask the Holy Spirit to come to us, to inspire us. We will pray, of course, throughout the assembly. One of the things that we had been asked to do after last year's assembly is, couldn't we, instead of just praying before any controversial vote, can't we pray before every vote? So we're going to build that into our agenda as well. So, for people guided by the Holy Spirit, And that's what we do together as Synod. So the Synod Assembly is composed of elected voting members, that's you, and you're coming on behalf of congregations. So there are lay and there are rostered people. Now, it's important to note that you are a voting member. You're not a delegate. Why is that important? Well, delegates are, they come on behalf of their organization, their entity, and they vote as they've been instructed by that entity. But voting members, you are charged with voting your conscience. You're charged with, as you listen to not just the presentation of a resolution or some other thing that we're voting on, but you get to hear the debate, people speaking for and people speaking against. And based on that, not what your pastor wants you to vote, not by what somebody else back home wants you to vote, you vote as you feel the Spirit is leading you. So that's the difference between delegates and elected voting members. And so we, each of us, were members of a congregation. There are 74, 75 congregations in our synod, and we are a synod. And if you are familiar with the Catholic Church or the Episcopal Church, it's like a diocese, it's a region, and we are part of the Metropolitan Washington, D.C. Synod. There's also Delaware, Maryland Synod, and the Virginia Synod, just to give you an idea. And within the Synod, there are conferences. And those conferences, that's how we do some of our monthly business as a church. So if you don't know anything about your particular conference, talk to your pastor and find out about that. So we have 6 conferences: the DC Conference, Maryland, Montgomery, Virginia, Potomac, and Fairfax. But we are also part of a larger ELCA church-wide body. And that's made up of 65 synods, and we're clustered into 8 regions. And so our synod is one of the 8 synods as Region 8. Which includes DC, Maryland, Northern Virginia, Delaware, West Virginia, Central and Western Pennsylvania. So quite a good swath of our country. Now, leadership in a congregation sense, all of you, I'm sure, have councils, and those councils have presidents. Your congregations have pastors. Likewise, in the synod, we have a synod council. I would wager to bet that the synod council is larger than any congregation's council. There's something like 22 members on that synod council. And instead of a president of the synod, we have a vice president. That's the highest elected lay office in the synod. And then we have a synodical bishop, which is the pastor of the synod. But then as you get larger into the ELCA churchwide, then you also have a church council. You have an ELCA vice president. Like our vice president, the highest elected lay role in the entire ELCA. And then we have our presiding bishop, Bishop Elizabeth Eaton. So again, the pastor to the whole church. So there's a lot of overlap between how our congregations, the synod, and the national church all operate. And so each of these, we call them expressions. Each of these expressions of the church is accountable for specific work in the life of the church. Each of our congregations, we are the boots on the ground. We're the front line. We are accountable for the mission in our neighborhood, in our context. And, my church is very different from all of your churches, and yours from mine. So we take what we learn, for example, at the Synod Assembly, we take what we learn, and then we apply it in our own context. because nobody can take what works for some monster church out in the Midwest and plop it in the DC Synod. You have to always interpret for context. So that's what congregations are responsible for. Synods are accountable for supporting congregations as they carry out the mission. And so you'll hear more about that at the Synod Assembly, and you see how that mission is funded as you look at the mission spending plan. And then church-wide, that's responsible for our participation in God's mission, both global and domestic. So they've got a huge scope. As we look at our particular synod, we have a mission, and our mission is by the inspiration, again, you see the word inspire there, by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, we are called to cultivate a bold and boundless love for Jesus and for God's beloved creation. Again, if I could, I'll underline with my finger, bold, inspiration, love, boundless. Those are some really powerful words. So we'll explore more about those at the assembly. And the assembly has its own teams, like our congregations have evangelism, stewardship, worship, and music. We also have teams in the synod. We have an elections team, and that's where Pastor Carey is overseeing that. We have a nominations team. Pastor Tony Princeton is over that. Referencing council, Reverend Mark Edwards is over that. Worship, Pastor David Slagle-Peck. So we've got, and there are more than these, but we've got a number of people who are working within the synod to do the work of the church. So if you haven't been to it already, I encourage you to take a look at our Synod Assembly website, and you have a little picture of what that looks like. So when you go to that metrodcelca.org/synod-assembly-2023, then you'll get to our church or to the Synod Assembly website. There you can find all of the materials that you'll need for the assembly. There's a table of contents there that has hot links that will take you to all the documentation that you will need. And I encourage you to go and take a look at all that stuff before the assembly. It's helpful to download that stuff if you need to, if you can on your device, but don't save it to the last minute. It's a little bit too much to read, but you might want to have it, on your bedside table, because it could put you to sleep, maybe. So I think I want to pause for just a moment and I want to see your faces. So hi. Are there any questions on what we've talked about so far? All right. Well, Rick, I will hand it over to you. I'll put some slides up for you so that you can talk with us about parliamentary procedure.
Thank you, Pastor Jeff.
You're welcome. Can you see okay?
Yes. As stated, we use parliamentary procedure because it's an orderly method of handling business. You can see there on the slide, some of the key points are one matter at a time, make decisions efficiently, balances the rights of members, and assures that business is conducted fairly when they're out of the room. Next slide. Okay, still getting used to how we vote, and that has to do with the election runner software. and how we're going to deal with people that are both there in person and people who are online participants of the Synod Assembly. Early up in the agenda, we approve the agenda, rules of procedure. It gives us, the agenda gives us an order of business, and so that we're not interrupted by jumping around to topics willy-nilly. So the idea is if you want to bring up a matter and it's listed in the agenda, you should wait till that time to bring it up. There are some exceptions to that. There's a number of works on parliamentary procedure. We use Robert's Rules of Order. That's the most common one. It's called for in our Synod Constitution, and the way this works is anything that's not otherwise mentioned in the Synod Constitution and bylaws or special rules of the Synod Assembly, then Robert's Rules of Order governs. Robert's Rules of Order, the current edition is the 12th edition. It's quite a lengthy book. It has it's about 650 pages, not including the index. With the index, it's 714 pages. I've read it all. I don't know it all. I know what I hope is enough to get us through the Synod Assembly, but I also have it as a reference. If a situation comes up that I need to refer to it, I will. And we gave a high-level summary of Robert's Rules on the website, and we're going to cover a little bit of it on the next few slides. Next slide. So how it works. We have motions. More complicated motions are called resolutions. Resolution. Hello? Resolutions have whereas clauses and therefore be it resolved. So if it's a short motion, it's just usually a simple statement that's probably less 25 words or less, but anything longer than that gets put in a resolution form. You can only introduce a main motion when no other motions are pending before the assembly. And the example we have here, assuming no other business was before the assembly at the time, I move that the society contribute $100 to the centennial celebration. Next slide. Okay, you can have, once you've got a main motion on the floor, you can have secondary motions that relate to modifying the main motion or procedural items on how it's going to be handled. There's also incidental motions that relate to the welfare of the assembly or an individual member, and there are others that deal with questions of procedure. So one of the secondary motions is the motion to amend. And the example is I moved to amend the main motion by striking out $100 and inserting $150. Amending is probably one of the more common secondary motions that you will see at the Synod Assembly. Next slide. There's an order called precedence concerning secondary motion, and certain ones are not in order when a higher ranking motion is pending. The example, a motion to amend the main motion is not in order while a motion to refer the main motion to a committee is being considered. And in the short list that's on the Synod website, it gives the order of precedence of these secondary motions. Action and debate is usually limited to the immediately pending question. So sometimes if the presiding officer, usually the bishop, senses that somebody is talking about something that is not on the immediately pending motion, the bishop will ask the person to conform to that. There are a couple of exceptional cases. There's one called it's the first secondary motion to postpone indefinitely, and that's one of the examples of the motion where the debate can go into the points on the main motion, not just the motion itself to postpone indefinitely. Motions require a second, which indicates that there's at least two people that want the assembly to consider the motion. This is in there so that you can't have one person tying up the Synod assembly. Moving right along, next slide. So how do you make a motion? Well, there's 6 steps. Step 1, and it depends on if you're online or in person. If you're online, you send it in via chat. If you're in person, you stand up and go to a mic. In both cases, you identify yourself by name and congregation. And you make your motion. If it's short, you can just speak it if you're in person or chat. You don't explain it at this time, because you will be given the opportunity to speak first once we enter debate. If the motion is lengthy, it should be written and a copy given to the secretary. The chair will say a motion's been put before the assembly. Is there a second? Next slide. Step 2, we wait for somebody to second the motion. There are certain motions that don't require a second, and that's because of where they originate. If they originate from a committee or board, you already know that there are at least 2 people that want the item discussed, so a second can be dispensed with. And you can make a second by voice in person or raising your hand on the Zoom. Next. Step 3. Step 3 is important, and it's one that some people forget, but the chair has to state the motion to bring it formally before the assembly. Now, the chair will often read the motion, but if it's lengthy, the chair may something like the motion just read or published is now before you. Next slide. At that point, the motion now belongs to the assembly. It can be debated. There are certain secondary motions that you can't debate. The mover of the motion is afforded the opportunity to speak first and to speak last. If you wish to speak to the motion, you need to raise your hand or approach a mic if you're in person. And the chair will try to alternate between persons speaking for and against the motion so that we get a balanced debate. No person will be permitted to speak a second time, and more generally, this is everybody's got to be given a chance to speak a first time before anybody gets a chance to speak a second time. But because of the large attendance in a Synod assembly, you can assume that you will only have an opportunity to speak once unless you were the mover of the motion. Now, this applies to the motion at each level. If a secondary motion is made on the main motion, you can speak on the secondary motion. So there may be a number of secondary motions attached to a main motion, and you're allowed to speak on each one of those separately. Next. Step 5, they take a vote, and depending on what it is, we may go by showing of hands, voice in person, aye, nay, thumbs up, thumbs down. If it's a more complicated motion, we will do it electronically using the election runner software. Which one we use depends on how complicated or controversial we expect the motion to be. We try to do as much as we can by the first method, because every time we use the election runner software, there's a cost associated with that. So we use it when we need it, but we don't want to unnecessarily spend the Synod money to use election runner for each and every vote. And finally, step 6, the chair announces the results of the vote. And at this point, if any member doubts the result, they can appeal the decision of the chair. And actually, if the vote is close, the chair would welcome such an appeal, at which point we do a more significant counting. This particularly applies to the voice vote. Anybody have any questions? Jeff, back to you.
All right, thank you, Rick. I appreciate that. And if all of this seems a bit overwhelming, it's okay. We'll guide you through it. And we'll make sure that Rick will actually make sure that we do everything in good order. Again, if you haven't yet, please put your email address in the chat so that we can play around with our election stuff. And now I will introduce you, if you don't know her already. Yes, Rick.
Jeff, one other thing I should mention, we don't anticipate a lot of complicated parliamentary procedural things at this Synod Assembly at a one-day Synod Assembly. I'm prepared if something comes up, but you will find that I'm mostly silent at the Synod Assembly and only get involved if we get a complicated issue. The other thing I would like to mention is I will be available at the Synod Assembly if somebody wants to ask me questions about procedure. If they have an idea and they're not sure how to frame it, I'll be available to help them do that. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. And you see a note from Catherine that Election Runner is the app that we use. So that's what we will now learn about more from Carrie.
Right. So Election Runner is software that allows us to vote. And because each ballot or voting question will be emailed to everyone. That's why you need a device with you who is there in person. And it allows people who are participating in the assembly through Zoom to also vote at the same time. So we are going to attempt a sample vote. Jeff, have you been able to put in all of the voting members?
Catherine was able to do that, and I am working on some of the behind the scenes stuff.
Awesome. Thank you, Catherine. And at the assembly, when you register, all of this information will be gathered. If you are registered, then your name will go automatically into Election Runner for the vote. But we just have some silly practice questions, which hopefully are going to work out just fine. Let me see. All right, let's try this one.
But we're not quite ready yet.
Okay.
But we can talk about when, let's see, which one you're wanting to do, the first one?
I was going to do the favorite dessert.
Okay.
Important question.
There is a delay, not normally just like this one, but there is normally a delay. Once the bishop says you may vote, then Pastor Carey will push a little button that prepares the vote to go out. But then there's a little time lag of about 2 minutes. So if you don't get it right away, it's okay. Nothing has gone wrong there. And what I'm doing right now is I'm loading in what Catherine shared with us. All right, now we're ready to go.
Okay.
And part of this is so that Pastor Carey and I work out any kinks.
Will this all work?
We have confidence.
So as we explained, there is a lag that happens during this time. And so we are planning some different videos for us to watch. So that way it's not just all sitting around, checking your email over and over again to see if it comes through.
Right.
So we will have some little buffer time in there, but also just be prepared for the fact that there will be these kind of little awkward silence times that hopefully you can use your egg shaker and spice things up.
So I have sent it. It generally takes 2 minutes for the emails to arrive to you, but if you would check your email in 1 minute and 49 seconds, you should be able to vote.
So I have a question.
Yes.
Is there not an issue with that many people in the same venue using their phones and their iPads and whatever and getting emails?
We hope and pray not. It worked last year when we did this at a conference space, and we believe that Good Shepherd Lutheran Church has been working to make sure they have enough Wi-Fi bandwidth or whatever it is that makes that possible.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Because there's going to be a lot of data going around because they've got a live stream and all those things as well.
Jeff, I assume these email will only be sent to voting members. Visitors will not receive these voting emails, although they'll see the results of them on their screen.
That is correct. I have just received my own vote. So it will come from Metro DC Synod, and it'll say your invitation to vote in the election, favorite dessert.
Yeah, I got mine.
Okay, so you can click on that. And just then you click here to vote. And then you can choose your favorite dessert.
And you're
Hit submit ballot, and it will say, are you sure you want to submit your ballot? And then if you wish, you can download a receipt of your ballot if you really need to know how you voted on favorite desserts.
yes, Mark.
So I'm assuming that the individual responses you won't see who voted which way, or I guess that should be more of a question, because some cases you might want to do that, but behind the scenes it's going to keep track of who voted to make sure everything's legit and auditable and all that, right?
Yeah, I don't know that we can actually see that information. There are two things that we do have. One is an audit trail, and it just says whether who voted and at what time. It doesn't give what you voted. And then there's another thing that you download that shows the number of people who voted for cake, that kind of thing. So
Yeah,
yes.
and once everyone has voted, then it will show the results, and I will attempt to share the screen so that you can see that. If
And
it keeps saying no results yet. Not quite sure what that is about. Do you know, Jeff?
and will there still be audible votes or raising hands at all, or is it all for this?
Yes, we will do that whenever possible. When there are we will be electing members to Synod Council. In the vast majority of cases, those are not contested elections. We will do that by voice acclamation or by raised hand for those on Zoom. So whenever possible, we will do that.
Okay, thank you.
Pastor Carey, was there a time on it? Is that why it's not yet ready?
Now it's saying 94% of the 17 people have voted.
I went ahead and closed the election.
Okay.
You can see the
Oh,
results.
there we go. Here we got results. Now if I can share screen, I will show you the results. There we go. Ice cream was the big winner. Then cookies, pie, other, and cake. All right. Do we want to try one other? We want to, I think, try one that had where you could choose more than one answer. So let me, okay. Yep, I guess the voters have to be inputted with each vote.
Yes, I'm.
You're
catching
on it.
up to you.
Okay.
I'll make a comment here on questions where you can do multiples. You can vote for up to as many as are permitted. You can vote for fewer.
Yes, yeah, you have to choose one. I think this one I said you could do 3 between 1 and 3.
So all the voters are updated now here.
Okay,
Or you can choose to not vote at all.
yes. All right, I have launched it in 2 minutes. You should have your invitation.
One nice thing about the election software is that it won't allow you to vote for more than you're entitled to vote for. Where when we have paper ballots, that's not the case, and we have to review the ballots, and any paper ballot that comes in with more votes than are permitted, that becomes an invalid ballot. So as a result, when we're using election runner, I don't think we ever get an invalid ballot, although there may be some exception that would cause a ballot to be invalid.
Yeah, well, and because the ballots are sent directly to each person registered, you know that only people who are registered are voting. So my vote is in, you can, or my ballot is in, should be able to vote for the next one. And there are 2 different questions.
The bonus of using this software as opposed to the election devices we used to use, while there is a cost associated, it is nowhere near the cost that was associated with bringing someone out to bring all the devices and all of that. But also, if we need to have a hybrid election and we have people who are online and we have them in the space, we can do that. And so that's why we went to this system 2 years ago. And so if there is someone who is not able to attend in person, we will have that capability. And it was sent out in the most recent email this week to tell you how to do that, which is the exact same link that you were using tonight.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and incidentally, it's very important whether you attend in person or online to check in, go through the check-in process, because that is part of what gets you on the list that gets into election runner.
Yes.
And yes, is there a way to abstain from a vote? Yes, there is.
Yeah, and then if we're voting for, the election of a city council member or something, there'll be, aye, nay, or abstain will be the options. And I have results on our trivia here. And actually, it was true. He did translate the Bible in just 11 weeks. At least according to Google. the nicknames for Katie. Brewmaster General was not a legitimate nickname. I made that one up, although she did frequently brew the household beer. But Luther did call his wife Kitty, my rib, Lord Katie, and Frau Doctor.
My Nun on the Run is kind of fun though.
That I made up too.
Was
So
kind of
that is how the elections software works. We will have questions pertaining to the business of the Synod when we actually do this. But you have successfully voted. So we can actually do this. So thank you very much.
So are there any, thank you, Pastor Carey. Are there questions about voting? And as Rick mentioned, only the people who register, get checked in, and are voting members, only they will get the emails. So that's why it's important for you to have access to your own device. Okay. Any other questions in general about the assembly or being a new voting person? One person wrote to me earlier and asked, what are my responsibilities as an assembly person? We went over the delegate versus voting member. That's a piece of it. The other piece of it is, do you need to bring anything back to your congregation? And I think that it's very helpful to bring things back to the congregation, but generally we do publish something from the Synod that has some news or some updates on what happened at the assembly. But if you really get captured by something, if you're inspired by something, by all means, talk with people in your congregation, your pastor, your council, let that spirit, fan those flames, right? Okay, well, I don't see any further questions. See, what are the voting issues we'll be discussing? At this point, there are some resolutions, and there's the typical resolutions that we always have at assemblies at the very beginning are resolutions of greeting. So we greet other, and you can see the link that Catherine posted in the chat, but there's greetings from other synods and 2 other synods that are meeting the same weekend. Specific resolutions, you can find those at that link. Other than that, there's a constitutional amendment, compensation guidelines, the 2024 mission spending plan, those kinds of things. So thank you for your question.
And finally, a resolution of thanks at the end, thanking all the people who helped pull this off.
Thank you for that. Any further questions?
I would just say, if you have not looked through this report, we have every single item on here, including all the information on candidates. We will be posting, I will be putting together a batch so you can download all of these into one big PDF that will be posted by Monday or Tuesday. Sorry, it's a holiday. But our goal is to have it up by Tuesday. I'll be putting that together tomorrow. So you'll be able to just have that downloaded to your device, if that would be easier to flip through. And I have numbered each one of those in that PDF exactly in order of this, so that way we can batch them pretty quickly for you.
And thank you for doing that. Will worship materials be available in print or loaded for us to print? And Catherine, I see you unmuting yourself.
Yeah, so we will not be printing anything but the agenda for you to have in your hands, but we will have screens available that will have the worship up, as well as some of the resolutions and things will be posted in that way, and then we will also have them. We will hopefully have those in that batch. But yes, it is overwhelming, but I am I guarantee we will make it as easy as possible when it comes to the time. And any questions, feel free. We have a ton of volunteers who are going to be there to help guide you through all of this. And we really hope this will be a joyous event. I'm going to pass this back to Jeff.
Thank you. Yeah, for a first timer, this is overwhelming, but I'm confident I will understand it all soon. Thank you. Yeah, it does feel like drinking water from a fire hose. But yeah, what Catherine has done really makes it very, very easy. If you would have gone to an assembly back in the day when we did print everything, that was hard because I found that by the time I found the piece of paper that I needed, they were already 2 votes down the road. So
Another thing I would just mention is that many of the people, including all of the pastors in attendance, have been to Synod Assembly before and would be happy to answer questions. If if something comes up and you just raise your hand and say, what? I need some help. Lots of people available to do that.
And as we prepare to leave for this evening, I do really want to thank all of you for stepping up from your congregation and coming to the assembly. We recognize that it's a big thing to give up your whole Saturday. But as Catherine said, I hope you have a good time, an inspirational time, and do please stretch yourself and go talk to people that you don't know. It's okay to just kind of poke somebody on the side on the arm and say, hey, I don't know you. So just have fun.
I want to give you one more piece. So when you come in to register, well, you'll come into the main step, the main doors of the congregation. We will have volunteers there that show you exactly where to go. You will have it based on your last name. You will have a name tag there as well as a packet. On the packet will be which workshop, which lunch, all of those things that you have signed up for. You do not have to have remembered that. We have built that into the process. So that will be on your packet for you to know exactly what you have signed up for. It's going to help to also help with flow, because we have many people in just one small, not small, but one congregational space. And so knowing exactly which view room you are going to is very important, as opposed to just trying to figure it out the day of. So all of those things will be prepared for you. You will know them based on the supplies that you will be given.
That's very helpful. Yeah. All right. Well, my email address is synodisassemblyteam@metrodcelca.org. I think that's on our website and in the emails as well. So feel free to email me, and I'd love to hear from you and answer your questions. You're very welcome for all the information, and looking forward to meeting you in person as well. Yeah, Catherine pasted my email address there. So until the Synod Assembly, I look forward to seeing you. Come well rested and ready to have some fun. So again, thank you for being here, and God bless you.